Okay, so let's dive into one of the 20th century's most pivotal and, honestly, most controversial figures, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. He was the man behind the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and his story is this incredible mix of faith, raw power, and an impact that literally changed the world.
And this slide, right here, gets straight to the heart of it all. In Iran, and for many in the Islamic world, he's seen as this hero, this inspirational leader who finally stood up to the West. But in that same West, he's often seen as the face of religious extremism and a brutal dictator. That's the conflict we're going to unpack today.
You know, to really understand the revolutionary, you first have to get to know the cleric. He spent his youth completely immersed in religious study, steadily climbing the ladder of the Shiite clergy. And by the early 60s, he wasn't just another scholar. No, he was a magnetic voice, pulling in followers with his devout, no-compromise attitude. And let's just pause on this title for a second. Ayatollah. This isn't just a name, it's a symbol of immense religious authority, a title you have to earn through years and years of intense scholarship. It gave Khomeini the credibility to speak directly to millions of Iranians in a way no politician ever could.
So this is where things really start to heat up. The ruler of Iran at the time, the Shah, kicks off this program called the White Revolution. Now, on paper, it was all about modernizing Iran, things like land reform, giving women the right to vote. But for a lot of religious Iranians, it felt like a direct assault on their traditions, a forced westernization that only seemed to help the rich get richer. For Khomeini, this was a line in the sand.
And this was the moment everything ignited. Other clerics were upset, sure, but Khomeini was the first to stand up and just unload on the Shah himself, calling him a wretched, miserable man. It was an incredibly bold and dangerous move, and it led directly to his arrest and, soon after, his exile from Iran. And just like that, his next chapter begins. 15 long years in exile. First, he's shipped off to Turkey, then he moves to the holy city of Najaf in Iraq, and eventually he winds up in France. He was a long, long way from home, but believe me, his influence was about to get a whole lot stronger.
This is so brilliant, you have to appreciate the strategy here. From thousands of miles away, what does he use? Cassette tapes. Simple, low-tech cassette tapes. His sermons were smuggled into Iran, then copied and passed from hand to hand. It was like a viral message before the internet, keeping that revolutionary flame alive and growing his support base day by day.
But it wasn't just about inspiring sermons. No? During his years in Iraq, he was putting the finishing touches on the one political idea that would completely rewrite Iran's future.
Now you have to understand, this was a huge deal. For centuries, the tradition in Shia Islam was for the clergy to stay out of politics. But Khomeini flipped that script entirely. He argued that it wasn't just an option, but a sacred duty for the top religious scholars to actually govern the state. This was a revolutionary idea.
So after Iraq kicks him out, he lands in a small town just outside of Paris. And this move, maybe accidentally, turned out to be a stroke of genius. Suddenly, he's in the backyard of the international media. Every major news network is there, broadcasting his interviews and his demands to a global audience. He became an icon overnight.
Meanwhile, back in Iran, the fire that Khomeini had been stoking from afar had turned into an absolute inferno. Years of anger over corruption and the Shah's brutal secret police finally boiled over. The protests were massive, unstoppable. The Shah saw the writing on the wall, and on January 16th, he fled the country for good, leaving a massive power vacuum in his wake. And just 2 weeks later, on this day, February 1st, 1979, Khomeini boards a chartered jumbo jet to fly back to Tehran. It was the end of his 15 years in exile and the beginning of the revolution's final dramatic act.
The scenes from that day are just staggering. He wasn't greeted like a politician. He was welcomed like a messiah. Millions of people flooded the streets of Tehran. It was one of the largest public gatherings in human history. All these people desperate for the new Islamic government he had promised.
And he did not waste a single second. He was quickly made the supreme leader, giving him the final say on everything. Iran was officially declared an Islamic Republic, and he began totally reshaping the country in his image, putting his interpretation of Islam at the very center of life. That, of course, included greenlighting the takeover of the U.S. Embassy, an act that would poison Iran's relationship with the West for generations.
And right here, you can see the huge gap between the rhetoric and the reality. He'd said he just wanted to help people create their own government, but in practice, pretty much every major decision was made by him personally. And his stand against foreign powers? Well, that led to the 444-day hostage crisis and a brutal 8-year-long war with Iraq that cost hundreds of thousands of lives.
You know, this chart really puts his life in perspective. We tend to focus on his 10 years as supreme leader, and for good reason. He totally remade Iran in that decade. But that period was built on a much, much longer foundation of study, struggle, and 15 years of relentless opposition from exile.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to the central contradiction. Was he a champion who freed his country from the thumb of foreign powers? Or was he an authoritarian who crushed dissent and took away personal freedoms? The truth is, depending on who you ask, he was both.
And it is so critical to remember that his impact goes way beyond Iran's borders. The 1979 revolution sent shockwaves across the entire planet. It inspired Islamist movements everywhere and completely changed the political playbook in the Middle East forever.
So, in the end, we're left with this really difficult question. How do you judge a man who, to some, is a national hero and to others, a tyrant? His story doesn't give us easy answers, but it forces us to think hard about the very nature of revolution, faith, and power itself.